Have you ever woken up one morning and felt an unfamiliar emptiness, as if a part of you had been slowly fading away? You look back at the years you've spent, giving, sacrificing, holding everything together for those you love. And now, as the seasons of life shift, a quiet question lingers in the back of your mind. After all I've given, what is left for me? Life is fleeting, like the morning mist that rises from the river, only to vanish with the first rays of sunlight. For decades, you have poured yourself into others, your family, your relationships, your career. You have built, nurtured, and supported, always putting the needs of others before your own. And yet, as the years advance, you may find yourself standing at a crossroads, asking, where did all that energy go? And more importantly, who is giving back to me? Buddhism teaches us a profound truth. Attachment to expectations leads to suffering. We believe that love, loyalty, and care will be returned in kind. But the world does not pause to reciprocate. Younger generations are busy carving their own paths, wrapped up in their own struggles, their own dreams. If you spend your later years chasing their validation, trying to keep a place in their ever-moving world, you may find yourself exhausted, disheartened, and even resentful. So what is the answer? It is not in grasping for recognition, nor in chasing relationships that no longer nourish your soul. The answer is simple, yet profound. You must choose yourself, not out of selfishness, but out of wisdom. The time has come to reclaim the energy you have given so freely, to turn inward, to nurture your own spirit, and to embrace peace in solitude. This is not an escape from life, but a return to yourself, to what truly matters. Because in the end, the greatest act of love you can give the world is to first love yourself. The illusion of reciprocity. Throughout life we invest in others, believing with unwavering faith that love, kindness, and sacrifice will one day be returned in equal measure. We give with open hearts, expecting that our gestures of goodwill will set forth a cycle of reciprocity. Yet, as time drifts forward, a sobering truth emerges. Our efforts, no matter how sincere, are not always mirrored back. This is the nature of impermanence, or anicca, as the Buddha taught. Everything changes: relationships, people, circumstances. What once felt deeply intertwined can, over time, unravel into distance and indifference. Picture an elderly man, once the pillar of his family, the provider, the protector. In his younger years, he worked tirelessly, ensuring his children had every opportunity he never did. Late nights, early mornings, sacrifices big and small, his love was evident in every unspoken gesture. He assumed, perhaps naively, that one day, when he needed them, they would return the favor. Yet, as the years passed, his phone rang less frequently. The family dinners he once hosted became rare occurrences, replaced by hurried check-ins and empty promises of visits that never materialized. He sits by the window, watching the world move on without him, realizing that love given does not always return in the way one hopes. This illusion of reciprocity is deeply ingrained in human relationships. We tell ourselves that kindness begets kindness, that loyalty ensures loyalty. But the river of life does not flow in predictable patterns. It carves its own path, often moving away from where we had hoped it would go. The expectation that others will give back in the same way we have given is a silent contract that we write in our minds, yet no one else has signed it. Take the story of May, a woman who spent her entire life as the backbone of her family. From a young age, she cared for her siblings, later devoted herself to her husband, and eventually poured her soul into raising her children. She was always the one people turned to in times of crisis, the fixer, the nurturer, the constant source of warmth and stability. But as she grew older, she found herself sitting alone in the home that once echoed with laughter. Her children, now adults with families of their own, were preoccupied with their own lives. She called them often, but their responses were brief, hurried. "I'll visit soon, Mom," they would say, but soon never came. At first, May was heartbroken. She wondered what she had done wrong, why the love she had given so freely seemed to have disappeared into the void. But through years of reflection, she came to understand something profound. Attachment to expectation is the root of suffering. Love exists, but it does not adhere to the laws of fairness we impose upon it. She had given out of love, and that in itself was enough. Her peace did not need to come from being reciprocated, but from knowing she had loved fully, without conditions. Buddhism teaches us that suffering arises from clinging to people, to outcomes, to ideas of how things should be. The moment we release this grasp, we free ourselves. Love, like water, must flow naturally. When we try to force it into a container of expectations, it stagnates, turning into resentment, bitterness, or sorrow. True generosity, the kind that brings peace, is given without strings attached. There is liberation in understanding this truth. Instead of dwelling on what was not returned, one can shift their focus inward. Give, not because you expect, but because it aligns with who you are. Care for others, not as a means to secure future affection, but because it brings you fulfillment in the present. And when life inevitably shifts, when people drift away, when love is not returned in the way you had envisioned, meet it with acceptance rather than pain. This does not mean we should resign ourselves to loneliness or expect nothing from anyone. Rather, it is about finding balance, cherishing the love that is present, releasing the longing for what is absent, and understanding that each soul walks its own path. Some will return to us, and some will not, and that is simply the way of things. So let love be like the wind, felt but not held. Let kindness be given freely, like sunlight that warms without expectation. And above all, let peace be found, not in what is received, but in the wisdom that giving, in itself, is enough. Reclaiming your energy. Old age is not a time to chase after others, or to beg for acknowledgement. It is a time to reclaim what was once given away so freely: energy, peace, and self-respect. For decades, you may have poured yourself into relationships, obligations, and responsibilities, giving endlessly, hoping that the love and attention you invested would return to you in kind. But now, in the twilight of life, a profound truth emerges. If you do not reclaim your own energy, no one else will do it for you. This does not mean shutting yourself off from the world or retreating into solitude. No, it means something far more empowering. It means self-prioritization. It means recognizing that your well-being is not an afterthought, but the foundation of a life well lived. So instead of seeking approval, attention, or validation from those who may be too preoccupied with their own lives, turn inward. Ask yourself, what brings me joy? What have I long neglected? What is still possible in this life? The answers may surprise you. Perhaps you once dreamed of learning to paint, but life got in the way. Maybe you always wanted to travel, but postponed it indefinitely. Or maybe it's something simpler, sitting on the porch with a cup of tea, listening to the rustle of leaves, allowing yourself to exist without the weight of expectations. Walking alone in nature, revisiting the books that have long sat untouched, practicing mindfulness, not as luxuries, but as lifelines to your own essence. Let's take the story of Mr. Huang, a retired school teacher, who spent his entire life shaping the minds of others. For 40 years he gave everything he had, his wisdom, his patience, his heart, to his students. He worked late into the night grading papers, stayed after school to tutor struggling children, and even sacrificed personal time to help others succeed. He assumed that, In his later years, his students, colleagues, and family would surround him, showering him with the same care he had once given. But life moved on. His former students built their own careers and families. His children became busy with their own lives, and the school where he once taught replaced him with a younger teacher. The realization hit him hard. He had spent so much time giving to others that he had forgotten to give to himself. One day, a friend suggested he pick up the violin, a childhood passion he had abandoned. At first, he hesitated. "I'm too old to learn something new," he thought. But with nothing to lose, he decided to try. The first few weeks were frustrating. His fingers were stiff. The bow felt unfamiliar in his hands. But slowly something miraculous happened. The music began to flow, not perfectly but beautifully in its own way. He felt something he had not felt in years, a sense of fulfillment that was entirely his own. Playing the violin had no purpose other than bringing him joy, and in that joy he found himself again. Buddhism teaches the practice of samadhi, deep concentration and inner tranquility. When we reclaim our energy, we are engaging in one of the most profound acts of self-care. This is not indulgence, nor is it selfishness. This is wisdom. It is the realization that your own well-being is just as important as the well-being of those you once cared for. Think of a candle that has burned itself to the wick, flickering weakly after years of illuminating others. If it does not take time to replenish its flame, what light will remain to guide the way? Your energy, your peace, your sense of self. These are not things to be given away without limit. They must be nurtured, protected, and restored. It is never too late to reclaim what is yours, to embrace the quiet joy of solitude, to immerse yourself in creative pursuits, to let go of the need for validation, and most importantly, to recognize that this life, this very moment, is still yours to shape. So take a deep breath, step forward, and reclaim what has always belonged to you: your energy, your peace, and your right to live fully, unapologetically, and without regret. The power of silence. Silence is often misunderstood. In youth, people feel an overwhelming need to speak, to explain themselves, to defend their choices, to debate, to prove their worth. They raise their voices, hoping to be heard, believing that words alone can shape reality. But as one ages, a realization dawns. Most people do not listen to understand, they listen to reply. Conversations become battlegrounds where words are weapons, and yet more often than not, no one truly wins. Buddhism teaches that speech should be measured and purposeful. Right speech, samavaka, is one of the eightfold paths to enlightenment. It does not mean remaining silent at all times, but rather choosing words wisely, speaking only when necessary, when words serve a purpose of truth and kindness, and when they do not, silence is often the wiser path. There is a story of an elderly monk who had once been a celebrated scholar. He had spent decades debating philosophical concepts, engaging in discussions that at the time seemed vital. But one day he encountered a young, arrogant student who challenged him. The boy, full of bravado, spoke in rapid bursts, attempting to prove that the old monk's knowledge was outdated. The monk listened, nodding occasionally, never interrupting. When the student had finished, the old monk simply smiled and said, "Thank you for sharing your thoughts." Then he walked away. The student was stunned. He had expected a rebuttal, a counter-argument, some form of validation for his engagement, but the monk had given him nothing to push against, no resistance, no conflict. Over time, the young man came to realize the lesson in that silence. Not every battle needs to be fought. Sometimes, the greatest wisdom is in knowing when to let go. Picture an old man arguing with a younger colleague, trying to prove that his years of experience should be respected. The young man, eager to assert himself, dismisses his wisdom, insisting that times have changed and that experience is outdated. The old man could argue, could try to convince the younger one of his worth. But instead, he simply smiles and walks away, carrying his wisdom within him, needing no validation. That is the power of silence. In a world that prizes noise, constant notifications, opinions, arguments, it takes strength to choose stillness. The modern mind is conditioned to respond, to react, to be heard at all costs. But silence is a discipline, a skill, and above all, a form of wisdom. It is the ability to listen without rushing to speak, to observe without the need to correct, to let others hold their opinions without demanding agreement. There is an old Zen saying, "Do not speak unless you can improve the silence." How many words spoken in frustration or pride truly improve the moment? How often do we regret the things said in anger or haste? True power lies not in how much one speaks, but in how much one understands without having to say a word. Consider a mother and daughter locked in an argument. The daughter, full of youthful passion, accuses her mother of being too controlling, too overprotective. The mother, wounded, feels the urge to defend herself. But instead of arguing, she listens. She lets her daughter speak, lets her emotions run their course. When the daughter is finished, the mother takes a deep breath and says, "I hear you." That moment of quiet acknowledgement does more than any lengthy defense ever could. Silence, paired with presence, has a weight that words often lack. This is not to say that silence is always the answer. There are times when words must be spoken, when injustice must be called out, when truth must be defended. But the difference is in intention. Are the words spoken out of ego, out of a need to be right? Or are they spoken with clarity and purpose? A wise person knows when to speak and when to remain silent. They understand that silence does not mean weakness. It means mastery over one's impulses. It means knowing that some conversations are not worth the energy, that some arguments cannot be won, that the peace of mind gained from walking away is worth more than the fleeting satisfaction of proving a point. So the next time you feel the need to defend yourself, to argue, to prove your worth through words, pause. Ask yourself, is this necessary? Will my words bring clarity or only more noise? If the answer is unclear, choose silence. Let your wisdom speak for itself, because in the end it is not the loudest voice that holds power, but the one that speaks only when it truly matters. Observing instead of interfering, there is a deep-seated urge within us to correct, to guide, to step in and shield others from the mistakes we once made. It comes from a place of love, from experience hard-earned through our own struggles. We see a child making a decision that we know will lead to disappointment. We watch a friend trapped in a pattern of self-destruction. We feel the impulse to intervene, to save them from pain, to offer our wisdom so they do not have to suffer as we once did. But here's the reality. Wisdom, when given freely and unsolicited, is rarely accepted. Most people must walk their own path, stumble on their own stones, and learn through their own experiences. Buddha himself, when asked to intervene in the quarrels of others, often responded with silence, not because he was indifferent, but because he understood the nature of suffering. Pain is a teacher, struggle is a sculptor, carving away ignorance and illusion, shaping the soul with every hardship endured. If we step in too soon, if we rob someone of their lesson, we deny them the growth that pain was meant to provide. The caterpillar must struggle out of its cocoon to strengthen its wings. If someone peels it open too soon, the butterfly never flies. Take, for example, the story of Anand, a devoted son who watched his father gamble away their family's wealth. Night after night, Anand pleaded with his father to stop. He presented logic. He expressed his pain. He even sought help from relatives. But his father was unmoved. No amount of words, no desperate arguments, no threats could change his behavior. And so Anand made a difficult decision. He let go. Instead of trying to control his father, he shifted his focus inward. He worked harder, built a secure future for himself, and refused to let his father's choices dictate his own peace. Eventually, when his father hit rock bottom, he sought out Anand, not for money, but for understanding. It was only then, when he had faced the full weight of his own mistakes, that he was ready to listen. This is the essence of detachment, not abandonment, but trust. Trust that the universe unfolds as it should, that people must experience their own lessons at their own pace, that just because we see the storm coming does not mean we should pull others inside. Sometimes they need to stand in the rain to understand why shelter matters. Detachment does not mean indifference. It is not coldness or apathy. It is the ability to love without possession, to care without control. It means focusing not on changing others, but on what is within our reach, our own peace, our own actions, our own responses. Imagine holding a bird in your hand, squeeze too tightly, and you crush it. Hold it with an open palm, and it may stay or it may fly. But either way, it is free, and so are you. Consider the old fisherman who lived by a river. Every day, he watched young men struggle against the current, trying to swim across despite the dangers. Many times, he had the urge to call out, to warn them, to tell them to take the safer route further downstream. But he knew that some lessons must be learned firsthand, so he remained silent. And in time, those who struggled eventually found the strength to swim more skillfully, or learned to respect the river's force. Had he intervened, they might have never developed that wisdom on their own. Not everything needs our interference. Not every battle is ours to fight. There is an art in stepping back, in allowing life to be what it is, without our constant attempt to shape it. True wisdom is knowing when to speak and when to stay silent, when to help and when to step aside. So the next time you feel the urge to correct, to fix, to change someone, pause. Ask yourself, am I doing this for them or for my own discomfort with their struggle? If the answer is the latter, let go. Focus on what you can control, your own energy, your own journey, your own peace. Because at the end of the day, the only person you truly have the power to change is yourself. Letting go of the need for approval. One of the greatest sources of suffering is the need for approval. From childhood, we are conditioned to seek validation, to be praised for our achievements, to be accepted by our peers, to be loved by our families. This craving for approval seeps into every facet of life: the way we dress, the career paths we choose, the relationships we enter. People spend years, sometimes decades, shaping their actions based on how others perceive them. They fear rejection, long for appreciation, and crave acknowledgement. But as time passes and the later years of life arrive, a crucial question emerges: why am I still trying to prove myself? There is a story of an old woman named Lila who had spent most of her life seeking the approval of others. As a young girl, she was the obedient daughter, always striving to make her parents proud. As a wife, she sacrificed her own dreams to be the supportive partner. As a mother, she placed the needs of her children above all else. But when she found herself alone in her 60s, with her children grown and her husband gone, she realized something unsettling. She had never truly lived for herself. Every decision, every sacrifice had been made with someone else's approval in mind. And now, standing in the silence of her own existence, she wondered, who am I when no one is watching? The truth is, no amount of external validation can bring lasting peace. The more one chases approval, the more power they give away. The Buddha taught that true happiness arises not from being understood by others, but from understanding oneself. Imagine a traveler carrying a heavy sack on their back, filled with the opinions and expectations of others. Each step they take is burdened by the weight of what society thinks, what their family wants, what their friends expect. But what would happen if, just for a moment, they set the sack down? The relief, the lightness, the sudden realization that the journey could be so much easier. This is the freedom that comes from releasing the need for approval. Letting go does not mean becoming indifferent or isolating oneself from others. It means redefining the source of one's worth. It means asking, do I like who I am? Do I live in alignment with my values? It is a shift from looking outward for validation to turning inward for acceptance. And in that shift, there is liberation. Take the story of Anand, a former businessman who spent years in pursuit of recognition. He built an empire, gathered wealth, and climbed every ladder that society deemed worthy of admiration. Yet despite his success, he often felt hollow inside. There was always another deal to close, another person to impress, another standard to meet. It wasn't until he walked away from his career, moving to a small village to live a simpler life, that he felt truly free. For the first time, he was not performing for anyone. He woke with the sun, worked with his hands, and found joy in the smallest of things. When an old colleague asked him if he missed the prestige, he simply smiled and said, "I have nothing to prove, and that is my greatest achievement." The need for approval is an illusion, a mirage that keeps us running towards something that can never truly satisfy. Approval is fleeting, always dependent on the whims of others, but self-acceptance, that is unshakable. It is the foundation of true peace. Think about the great masters, the monks who retreat into silence, the sages who live on mountaintops. They are not concerned with applause or admiration. They do not measure their worth by external recognition. They have found something far more valuable, contentment within themselves. Letting go of the need for approval is not an overnight process. It takes practice, patience, and deep introspection. It requires the courage to say, "I am enough as I am," even when the world says otherwise. It means standing firm in one's truth, even if it goes against the expectations of others. It is the art of choosing authenticity over acceptance, peace over performance. So ask yourself, what would my life look like if I stopped seeking approval? What choices would I make if I truly didn't care about the opinions of others? And then, slowly but surely, begin to walk in that direction. Because at the end of the day, the only person whose approval you truly need is your own. Conclusion: choosing yourself. The greatest act of self-respect is recognizing that personal well-being is not a luxury. It is a necessity. For too long, we have been conditioned to believe that prioritizing ourselves is selfish, that choosing peace means turning our backs on others. But the truth is, you cannot pour from an empty cup. Your body, your mind, your soul, they all require care, just as surely as a tree needs water, sunlight, and space to grow. Think about it. When was the last time you truly checked in with yourself? Not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. When was the last time you sat in silence and listened to your own thoughts, your own desires, your own truth? Life has a way of sweeping us up in obligations, in expectations, in the relentless demands of others. But here, in this moment, You are being called to return to yourself. As you enter the later years of life, remember this: you owe no one an explanation for choosing peace. You do not need permission to prioritize yourself. Happiness is not something given, it is something claimed. Let go of resentment. Release expectations. Allow yourself the freedom to step fully into your own presence. You have spent years, perhaps decades, giving, sacrificing, and shaping yourself to fit the needs of others. But now, this chapter is yours. It is time to nurture your own well-being, to cultivate joy, and to embrace the simple, profound contentment of just being. There is a quiet strength in choosing yourself, not out of defiance, but out of love. Love for the person you have become, love for the journey you have walked, love for the life that still lies ahead, waiting to be lived on your own terms. The river of life flows forward, and so must you. Not in search of validation, not chasing approval, but moving with the gentle ease of someone who knows that peace is not found outside, it is cultivated within. So take a deep breath. Feel the weight lifting from your shoulders. Step into your next chapter with grace, with purpose, with unwavering self-respect. And remember, your happiness is not up for debate. It is yours to own, yours to create, yours to embrace. If this message resonated with you, if you felt even a small shift within your heart, consider subscribing to this channel. Here we walk the path together, finding wisdom, peace, and strength in every step. Let's continue this journey toward a life of true fulfillment, one where you are finally, unapologetically, choosing yourself. Thank you for being here. Until next time, take care of yourself, because you are worth it.